What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel, and today it is the very first video of my off-season predictions series, where I'm going to talk about each and every team and what I would do in some key parts of their off-season. This is not a mock draft series. I'm looking at the salary cap, I'm looking at their head coaching position, I'm looking at potential free agent targets they could have, restructuring of contracts, re-signings of players, trading of their own players, and then I'll throw in a little draft strategy towards the end, but make sure to hit the like and the subscribe so you don't miss any of the teams that I'm going to be covering, and that way you can keep locked in and push this out with the algorithms. And today it's the Houston Texans. I thought it was a good place to start. They've pretty much been in off-season mode for the last 2 months. And I got some pretty good ideas out there for them, I think. It's going to be a slow build back for a team like Houston, who I don't necessarily believe is in a win-now position. I don't think there's as much pressure on them as there would be, say, the Indianapolis Colts, who were expected to do very well. There's not a lot of expectations of them doing well in Houston, but I think that this offseason could be very key for them setting up the future, the next 5 years, let's say, of their franchise. So let's get right into it. I got the chapters listed here so you guys can get through it maybe a little more quickly, go back and forth to get some more context on what I'm going to be covering with them and all my suggestions. But let's start out with the content. So let's start with the head coaching position that I do think Lovie Smith will be replaced. I think this is a good opportunity, like I said at the top, for Houston to completely sort of restart this whole thing. And I really like Shane Steichen, the current offensive coordinator for the Philadelphia Eagles. Is it Steichen or is it Steichen or is it Steichen? Whatever it is. He's been there for 2 years now, and it is undeniable, even for me as a Giants fan, what this guy has done as a play caller for that Eagles offense, which has been unbelievable this year. And more important than that, what he has done to help improve the game of Jalen Hurts. I understand, Sirianni's got a lot to do with that as well. But with the main offensive coordinator, it being him, and the amount of development that you've gotten out of him, and we're going to go through some of the current stats the Eagles have, which I think really is a gigantic selling point as well for Coach Steichen. And that is, the Eagles are 3rd in points, 8th in passing yards, 12th in passing touchdowns, 5th in rushing yards, 1st in rushing touchdowns, 1st in total touchdowns. They're the number 1 red zone percentage team in the league, and 5th in third down percentage. That is extremely efficient offensive play. And that's not just the raw talent of the players. There's a lot of the scheming that goes into that, the play calling that goes into that, the if-then scenarios that Steichen has laid out. And this is something that can really help out a young quarterback. And with currently, as it stands, it looks like they're going to have the number 1 pick unless something drastic happens on Sunday where they upset the Colts and then the Bears lose. And then they'll probably figure out a way to trade up with the Bears, give the Bears an extra pick or something like that, like a 4th round pick to move up to number 1. It's going to be probably Bryce Young, who's going to be their quarterback, a great athlete. And so he can really bring in his offensive mind, his offensive playbook, his offensive game planning, and really apply it to Bryce Young and help him develop along the way and get him some other players, some better teammates, some better weapons throughout the next couple of years. Give a bit of a long leash to him. And I think that Houston's in that position where they can give a true head coach that type of a leash. I think that they just sort of brought in Lovie Smith at the last minute last year, put him in a position where they were like, let's see what you can get out of this team. Didn't get anything out of them. They've been scrappy towards the end of the year, but I mean, look at these rankings. And to bring this over with a quarterback who, in terms of raw talent, like traditional quarterback talent, is light years ahead of what Jalen Hurts was when he was picked. And that development we've seen under Sirianni and Shane Steichen has been undeniable. And you can apply that to Bryce Young. And especially when you have a great left tackle in Laramie Tunsil, you have a great running back in Dameon Pierce, you can really get a lot out of, at least on the offense side of the ball. And then it's just a matter of bringing in a good and effective defensive coach and getting some of the personnel settled over there, with where you have still pieces with Derek Stingley and Jalen Pitre. Christian Harris is there as well at linebacker. Jonathan Grenard, I think, would be a decent edge too, and once you add another edge piece there. So there's a lot that Steichen can work with, but obviously his main effectiveness will be bringing these types of rankings over to the Houston Texans. Now we're going to get into some of the player personnel that the Houston Texans currently have. And their starting cap going into this offseason is $46.6 million, which is a fantastic amount of money to be dealing with. And from looking, I used overthecap.com, of course, to sort of do all this math, figure out who's a free agent, who's not, look at contracts, to try to get things sort of where they're at, what cap savings would look like. And there's really no one on their roster that I saw that's like a must re-sign, or that'd be a significant re-signing. And there was really no one there for a restructuring either. There was the Brandon Cooks situation, which they tried to trade him. I think that he will get traded, and it'll be a $10.3 million cap savings for them in the process. So they'll be able to knock 10.3 off of their cap while also acquiring some draft capital, hopefully, for Brandon Cooks. They could just flat out cut him, but I think that there's going to be enough out there for that teams will be willing to give up maybe a day 2 pick, a mid-day 2 pick, to get Brandon Cooks and just help give Steichen more draft capital to get the guys in that he needs to move this team along. And then I saw that Christian Kirksey had a $5 million cap savings if he got cut. And I think it was like a $1 million dead cap for cutting him. And I think that was pretty straightforward. Just get him off the books. You can spend that money probably more efficiently somewhere else. So after that, they now have a spending cap of $62 million with those 2 moves right there. And of course, it'll be approximately that. They do have some restricted free agents. They have some lower tier guys that would be eating up some minimum level contracts, which I think is like $850,000. But those are things that can be worked out a little bit later. Those like depth pieces, those third stringers, those like 8th or 9th offensive linemen, 5th interior defensive tackle. But we're going to talk about some of the free agent targets that they should go after using the $62 million. And there was a couple of guys that I saw that could be good impact players for them in next season. And we'll start by going over their team needs, which we got the quarterback position, obviously, wide receiver, tight end, I think could be a sort of sleeper one for them. I was big on Brevin Jordan, but I think if they can get a veteran, and spoiler alert, I have them getting one, to fill that role, that could be instantly effective, could be really helpful for a young rookie quarterback. And then, of course, I think offensive line depth and front 4 depth on the defense is really important as well. I think they can get a starting edge, a starting interior guy, and then probably also land a starting offensive lineman or 2 as well. So in the free agency market, starting with Boston Scott, who would be coming over from the Philadelphia Eagles to be a backup running back to Dameon Pierce. Somebody who knows the system, somebody who knows all the calls, all the hand signals, all the whatever, who can come in and be a voice in the practice room, in the film room, help out your young rookie quarterback with some calls, with some identifying pressures, how to move guys, knowing where guys are going to be based upon what the scheme is. Almost always you see a new head coach will bring in certain players that they worked with in the previous team that they were on. I think that looking at some of the players that are on that Eagles offense that are going to be free agents, there wasn't a whole lot to work with. Like there might be Miles Sanders, but there's probably too much money in that. So I think getting Boston Scott, he's a different type of running back than Dameon Pierce, so he'd be a good change of pace. And he also gives you that knowledgeable voice come training camp and OTAs and all that. I did talk about the tight end, and I saw Dalton Schultz. And keep in mind, I do have the cap hits there. That is, to me, what I'm sort of projecting to be the year one cap hit. It could be approximately that. And Dalton Schultz getting a $15 million cap hit would put him, I believe, as like the number 4 tight end. I think I had him placed at in terms of the amount per year, which is about $5 million more than he's making this year, and it's a little bit more than what the franchise tag would be for Dallas. But Dalton Schultz hasn't really been used in Dallas, so I think he's going to hit the market, and he can make a big money from a team perhaps looking to, I don't want to say overspend because he's been playing really great, but Houston's in a perfect position to do that. And to bring him in, he's an instant threat on the passing game, and he is, like always, a young quarterback's best friend at the tight end position. Then I looked at the offensive line. I saw Dalton Reisner, and I thought that he'd be a really good guy for them to bring in, a veteran presence, mainly an interior guy, which means the price tag on him isn't going to be that high. It'd be about $6 million from looking at the other interiors in the NFL right now and what their average cap hit is. And Dalton Reisner does have the ability to really play all 5 offensive line positions if you need him to. And he could be somebody that you could front load his contract, perhaps, because you do have all this cap room. You can front load his deal, and you won't feel as bad if he ends up becoming that 6th offensive lineman by the end of the year, because maybe you draft somebody on day 1 or day 2, or maybe you get one of those high upside guys that fall to early day 3 that you draft that may not be ready to play right away, but then you can eventually work in later in the season. And then you have Dalton Reisner for when you have injuries at any of the other offensive lineman positions. You can just slide him in there, and you got a really good replacement level player in that sense. And then Larry Ogunjobi. Now there's going to be people that might think the $10 million cap hit is high. But again, I think kind of like with Reisner, you can probably front load this deal, get him in, and then if it doesn't really work out, you could probably cut bait, set yourself up where it's a team-friendly contract in that second year where you can get yourself a safe out in the event that Ogunjobi doesn't step up and perform the way that you're hoping he would. But I think best case scenario, you end up with a great interior defensive lineman that you can play on all 3 downs and can help bring along some of these other guys that are there that are more specialists that you have on the roster right now. So you can bring in a nice healthy interior rotation at the interior number 2. And it's a short-term fix to help project for long-term success. So after all those moves, it looks like we have a roster fill and a draft cap remaining of $28 million. So there's enough there where they can sign some of those middle of the line, second, third wave free agents to fill out their roster depending on what happens in the draft. They work through the draft. You can take the best player available at all your picks because you really need just about everything. And then you can look at your roster after the draft, and then with that second wave, you got about $28 million to sign those rookies and then fill out the rest of the roster, which I think is a really good amount for them to have, especially when you can then use some of this extra cap to give contract extensions to certain players that you want to keep, like Laramie Tunsil. Jonathan Grenard's contract will be coming up. You can extend him. That would be probably advantageous. You can probably get a good deal on him as well. So I think it's a good number to be at, $28 million. And now we'll just go over a brief draft strategy for Houston. I do have an entire mock draft series that I've done for weeks and weeks now where you've sort of seen that Bryce Young is the guy for Houston. He needs to be the pick, especially if you bring in Shane Steichen for the head coaching role. This is the guy. You have to take him. This isn't one of those things where you could get a veteran like Matt Schaub and draft Mario Williams. It's not the same scenario. And I'd be very shocked if they tried to work out something where they got an already established quarterback, like someone at the level that Matt Schaub was when they acquired him, and then turn around and draft Will Anderson or Jalen Carter instead. I just don't think that's a possibility. But they do have 2 first-round picks, and in the last mock draft that I did, the 2-rounder for the Week 18 draft order, I had them trade down with the New York Giants, who then were coming up to get Quentin Johnston. And it allowed Houston to acquire more picks. They got a first-round pick in the draft the next year for the 2024 draft. And they still were able to get a quality player in Jared Verse to play edge rusher at 23. Now, because they have so many needs, I would actually probably encourage them to trade down with their second first-round pick. Obviously, unless there's somebody who just blows them away at workouts or at the combine. But, I mean, you got Paris Johnson, you got Peter Skoronski, you got Tyree Wilson, Jared Verse, and then Quentin Johnston, who are probably you're going to get 3 out of those 5 guys available at your pick. So if you really, really love one of them and you want to guarantee you get them, then obviously you take him. And I think that Quentin Johnston would be very high on that list just because the free agent market at wide receiver is not that great. And you run the risk of if you trade down, you might be in a position where you have to get that second, third tier of wide receiver in this draft, and it's not going to be that great. I think a lot of the best receivers are going to be going in the first round this year because I think teams are going to be jumping on them. So like Quentin Johnson, Jordan Addison, Jalen Hyatt, and JSN, I think are going to be all highly sought after players. Kayshon Boutte is going into the draft, so maybe you think about getting him at 33 if receivers start to fall a bit. But I think it's just in your best interest to maybe just stay on that pick and maybe take Quentin Johnston and then get to that second wave of edge rushers because the edge class is super deep as well. And I think at the 33rd pick, you can really fill that edge position a lot more efficiently than you could probably fill the wide receiver position at that same place. You could probably find a way to land a Nolan Smith, a Felix Anudike-Uzomah, a BJ Ojolari, Andre Carter. There's going to be a lot of options for them there. And then you never know what you're really going to get out of the Brandon Cooks trade if you do trade him. So maybe you can package that and move up into the first round if one of the edge guys you really like starts to drop. Like maybe Jared Verse drops, maybe Tyree Wilson drops. And then you can package some picks and move up to get them, and then you end up with 3 of those guys. Or maybe Broderick Jones drops. Or you really like a guy like Darnell Wright or DeJuan Jones, who I think are going to get a lot of first-round buzz as we get into the draft process. You can make a lot of moves there for Houston. It's just, again, there's so many needs, though, sometimes that maybe you do just stay where you're at, take the best player available in each spot, and then just have some patience and develop those players and just move down the line with a big-time 5-year projection. And there you go. I feel like I might have just set up the Houston Texans for one heck of a run over the next half a decade. You guys let me know in the comment section if you agree or not. And hit the thumbs up button. Subscribe if you haven't already so you don't miss any of the videos in this series. And I appreciate you guys coming back as always. So see you next time.